Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second webinar in our Digital Democracy Media Literacy for Democratic Participation series. We're glad to have you this afternoon. In our first webinar, we talked about how information spreads online and our role in navigating that information. I'm Chelsea Cartwright, the League's Democracy Truth Project Manager, and this series of webinars is in collaboration and partnership with our friends at the National Conference on Citizenship. So today we'll be exploring influencers, information environments, and civic power. We all spend a lot of time online. We want to get savvy with how information flows online, who is putting that information out there, and how we can translate that information into civic power. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my partner in this work, Caitlin Dowling, from the National Conference on Citizenship. Caitlin, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chelsea. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's great to see all of you. As Chelsea said, my name is Caitlin Dowling. I'm a senior research analyst at the National Conference on Citizenship, and I'm really glad to be back here with you today for the second part of our webinar series together. So this is a series that we're doing called Digital Democracy, Media Literacy for Democratic Participation Today. And we've developed this closely with the League of Women Voters. Chelsea and I have been working together closely on this. It's been a lot of fun to work on and sort of rethink how we're thinking about digital media literacy in 2026. If you were here for our first webinar, welcome back. It's great to have you here. And if this is your first time, I'm so glad that you've joined us. You can review a recording of our first webinar. Jillian will share a link to that in the chat. But don't worry if you haven't seen it. We will talk about some concepts today that were present in our first webinar, but I'll make sure that we're reviewing and talking as we go. So in our first session, we looked at the information environment online. How does information move online? How do platforms and algorithms shape what we see? And why does that environment these days feel so disorienting and overwhelming to all of us? So today we're going to be meeting the people who operate inside of that environment, the influencers, creators, commentators, celebrities, and all the rest. We'll talk about where online influence actually comes from today, how trust and power get built online, and how you can evaluate any of these claims that you see from any of these different kinds of people who create content online without having to keep up with every single individual personality, because that's just not possible. So same housekeeping as last time. Drop your questions in the Q&A as they come up, and we'll take them at the end. And also the session is being recorded, so you can revisit anything we talk about today later. Don't worry about having to, write down a bunch of frantic notes as we're talking. All right, so let's get into it. So here's where we're headed over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. By the end of today's session, you will be able to recognize where online political influence comes from today, why it's shifted away from traditional gatekeepers and who those gatekeepers are, distinguish among the many different kinds of people and accounts posting online, the users, typical everyday users, micro-influencers, creators and big-time influencers, celebrities, organizations and institutions, and then understand why those distinctions between different kinds of actors online matter. You'll also be able to describe how network effects and virality amplify content and how that connects back to a lot of the platform and algorithmic dynamics that we talked about in webinar 1. We'll also get a little bit into the SIFT method, which is a great sort of toolbox for evaluating claims from any source, no matter who's speaking. So we've got lots to talk about today, so let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so I always like to start with the why. Why spend a whole webinar just on influencers and information environments? And I think a lot of us kind of have a sort of baseline feeling, understanding of why influencers are important in general, even if they're not personally important to us. You see them on your own feeds. You probably hear about people in your life talking about them. Nieces, nephews, kids, grandkids are watching these people. Maybe you have friends. Maybe they just appear in your feed sometimes, even if you're not actively following them. And I think as league members, who think about the online world and how that interacts with the civic world, you also see how influencers who talk about civic issues and voting and democracy impact the work that the league does. But at the same time, you might get overwhelmed by the information chaos that surrounds these influencers. No one, not even me, and this is my job, can possibly keep up with and remember exactly who is who and who's trustworthy and who's not. So, what's the point of trying to wrangle all of this into something that we can understand and learn from? And I want to start with something that I hear often sort of in my work when I'm talking with people about the online information environment influencers. Maybe this resonates with you. Look, I know that people have big audiences online and I know they're important, but I can't keep up with them all. I turn on the news, suddenly they're talking about some guy named Clavicular who has millions of followers and how important he is. I have never heard of this guy. Apparently, he's important. But how am I supposed to keep up with this? And how am I supposed to know who's trustworthy and who's not? AI puts this whole other layer of complexity on top of this. I know it affects our democracy, but it's tempting to throw my hands up. I just don't know what to do. This feels like a really big problem. So that resonates with you. You're in the right place, and I'm glad you're here with us today. Because here is the thing. After our last webinar, we understand now that attention online equals influence. And influence shapes civic behavior. Who people vote for, who they trust, what they think is true, whether or not they participate in civic life at all. A lot of that is shaped by the voices that they hear and encounter online. And of course, I want to emphasize the internet is not the be all end all of influence, not even close. But we do need to recognize and grapple with the reality that lots of us are consuming vastly different kinds of civic information, and not all of that information is good and trustworthy. So even if you don't personally follow a single influencer, there are probably people in your life who do. And also, this is shaping our democracy, whether we're watching or not. So let's zoom out for a second. 20 to 25 years ago, when the internet as we know it today was really still in its infancy, a handful of networks and newspapers essentially defined what the news was. We had national TV from broadcasters like ABC, NBC, CBS. We had public media outlets, PBS, NPR, cable news channels like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, CNBC, national papers like the New York Times or USA Today, and strong local news presence through local papers, radio, local TV broadcasts covering issues that were relevant to your immediate local geographic community. And all of this had a very kind of unifying effect. In any given geographic location, people's media diets weren't all that dissimilar. People might have been, consuming slightly different things, but they were more or less getting the same information from the same sources. And maybe back up a bit. If you want to reach a broad audience in this sort of world, either locally or nationally, you had to go through these sort of media gatekeepers, as we call them. And maybe you as an individual could achieve some local influence through things like writing letters to the editor, op-eds, reaching out to a local TV station with a story. But if you want national influence, you have to go through some pretty difficult to identify and reach gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers are pretty selective about what they're going to allow sort of into the media landscape. There are producers, there are editors, there's fact checkers, and there are institutional norms. And these things aren't perfect necessarily, but they are there. But today, influence is dispersed across millions of creators, each with their own audiences online. The internet really weakened these traditional gatekeepers by giving people incredibly powerful and easy to use tools to create, publish, and reach new audiences far outside of their geographic area. And that change had a lot of real upsides. New voices are heard. People without institutional connections can build audiences of their own. Communities that have been historically ignored by mainstream media can tell their own stories to their own audiences. And they're still not speaking directly to their own audience in most cases. The platform is the intermediary. The social media platform is sort of how they're reaching those audiences. But the tools, the access, and the gatekeepers are much fewer and easier to bypass in this new world. Of course, that also leads to some real downsides. With fewer gatekeepers, there's a lot less accountability, fewer guardrails. It's much easier for false claims to reach large audiences at speed. And it's much harder to tell who to trust because the cues that we used to rely on, a recognizable masthead, a byline from a journalist from an institution that we could trust, an editor's name, those don't work the same way anymore. So this isn't just a media problem. It becomes a democracy problem because voters form opinions and understand the world through voices they hear online and offline. And so as we've shifted away from an information environment where gatekeepers had the ultimate authority on what we saw and heard, it becomes really, really critical to understand what shapes what influencers share. Or to put it shortly, who or what influences the influencers. So here is my promise for you for today's session. You don't need to keep up with every influencer. You cannot. And no one is right or wrong all of the time. What you need instead is a framework for evaluating any person who is speaking and understanding why they are saying the things that they're saying. So before we talk about influencers themselves, I just want to do a quick refresh on the information environment they're operating in. This will be quick, a little bit of a review from our first webinar, but just so that everyone is on the same page. So 3 big ideas from our last webinar. The first, mis and disinformation. Misinformation is false content shared without the intent to deceive. Think of like a well-meaning relative who sends you an email chain forward. Disinformation is false content that is deliberately spread to mislead. The intent between these two things are different. However, and this is really important, from a harm perspective, intent doesn't really matter. The impact on the information environment is the same. Misleading information misleads regardless of why it was shared. Number 2, platforms are not neutral pipes through which information freely flows. Algorithms rank what you see, and this builds you a feed of content that is optimized for engagement, not accuracy. You don't see everything that is posted online, and every piece of content that you see is the result of a ranking decision. And then third, all of this together produces what researchers call information chaos. Competing narratives, rumors that spread faster than corrections, deliberate efforts to flood the zone with bad information and exhaust us. And this all makes it harder to pay attention, to prioritize what information is most important, and to just understand what's happening on a given day. So that's the environment that we're operating in. And today we're going to meet the people operating inside of it and try to understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. So let's start with the simplest question. Who actually posts all this stuff that we see online? It turns out that this matters a lot because different kinds of people, different kinds of creators and influencers and users operate under very different incentive and accountability structures. So what does that mean? So think of this is not a hard and fast typology, but think of it more sort of a rough ladder, not a strict hierarchy necessarily, but just sort of a useful way to think about the kinds of people who are posting online and what they're thinking about when they do. So at one end, we have typical users, people like probably most of us on this call. We post to personal networks of friends, family, maybe a few acquaintances, coworkers. And most of what we share doesn't travel very far. And most of us aren't trying to get that information to travel very far. We really only want the people in our immediate networks to see it. But here's the twist. In the algorithmic era, even a typical user creating public content can suddenly go viral. A single post by someone with 400 followers can be seen by 40 million people by the end of the week if a post goes viral. So a typical user doesn't necessarily mean a user with zero influence or zero ability to go viral or to have their content spread far and wide. And you can ask, there are plenty of typical users out there who have had a moment of virality, an unexpected moment of virality, and sort of how unmooring and strange that all is. Next, we have what are sometimes referred to as micro influencers. And these accounts range from maybe 1,000 to 100,000 followers or so. That's sort of a common way of defining this. And micro influencers are often focused on a niche. Maybe they're really into local politics or a specific hobby or a professional community. And this is where we start to see what are called network effects, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Um, their audiences are small enough to feel personal, and this can engender some real feelings of trust between audience and creator. And a micro influencer with 20,000 highly engaged followers can have more persuasive power on certain topics than a celebrity with 5 million followers who are pretty passive. And then we get what we call sort of more influencers and creators. Content is their job. It's bringing in money. It's no longer just a hobby. They're monetized through platforms, sponsors, subscription fees, merchandise that they sell. They are living and dying by platform visibility, which means that they are structurally incentivized to learn what the algorithm rewards and to make more of it. Money and reach are really big activators of the behavior in this group. Next, we have people like celebrities, sort of traditional celebrities. These are people whose fame came from somewhere else: film, music, sports, politics, and they've ported that fame onto their social media platforms. They come with their audiences sort of pre installed already. They don't have to do a lot of work to gain visibility and to sort of gain more followers. And then finally, we have organizations, institutions, advocacy groups, traditional media outlets. They speak with a coordinated voice and usually with a more formal editorial process behind them. There's more accountability for these kinds of groups. So each of these groups operates under different incentives, different accountability structures, and also different relationships to accuracy of the information that they're sharing. So when you're evaluating a claim, the first move is sometimes just noticing who is speaking, what kind of an account is this, what sort of incentive structures are they operating under, what really motivates them. And when you're thinking about league work and influencers, you're probably thinking mostly about civic actors, as I call them. These are people, organizations, institutions involved with civic life or who talk about civic life online. And some of these are what we'd think of as traditional online influencers, but they can also be journalists. They can be traditional media outlets or independent media outlets, bad actors deliberately spreading falsehoods, media personalities, opinion writers, consultants, candidates for office, government officials. All of them are in your feed. And on a small screen, they all look roughly the same. They all look roughly equal, but they're not the same. A beat reporter at a major newspaper has editors, fact checkers, legal review, and also personal professional consequences for getting things wrong. An opinion columnist is paid to have a perspective, not to tell you neutral facts. And a political commentator, for instance, on a podcast, is often paid by how much engagement they're going to be driving, how much more attention they can bring to the podcast, which rewards things like intensity over accuracy. And of course, an anonymous account with no track record could be anyone, including someone trying to deliberately mislead you. So the answer, as we've been saying, isn't just how do I know who to trust or a list of good people to follow. And honestly, if we even had such a list, it would go stale really fast because the same people don't have influence, for years on end. The answer is really structural. We need to learn to ask, what kind of actor is this? What incentives are they operating under? What accountability exists for them and for what they say? And this is a skill that you can apply to any platform, any personality at any moment. So now let's talk about how people actually build large audiences online, because understanding how this all happens starts to sort of demystify some of the power here. So there's no specific formula for getting popular online, but there are some common pathways. And most successful creators are using a combination of these things. So one is pre-existing fame or credibility, like we talked about already. Someone who was already a famous doctor, a senator, an athlete, a respected professor, who ports that authority onto the platform. And their audience is pre-built to some extent. Second is making genuinely interesting, useful, relevant content. People like to share things that they find valuable and entertaining. So over time, if you keep making good content that people enjoy and share, that compounds. And plenty of good creators got big this way. There's also platform optimization, learning the mechanics of a platform, the optimal video length, getting a hook right in the first couple of seconds of your content, using the right hashtags and keywords, posting on the right cadence, not too often, not too often, not too little. For instance, if you make a 17-minute video on YouTube, you're filming it in landscape mode, you can't expect that video to do as well on YouTube if you were to upload the exact same video to TikTok, because TikTok doesn't optimize for 17-minute long videos filmed in landscape. They're two different platforms that promote different kinds of content. And so learning these kinds of things is a skill. And it's not sinister necessarily on its own, but it is part of this invisible scaffolding that I want you guys to learn how to see. There are these structural incentives that mean the content you see is shaped by these different kinds of incentives and rewards that everyone is sort of working within. There's also exploitation of the algorithm. And this is sort of a slightly darker version of learning what content works well on a platform. This is using deliberate tactics to get people to engage, even if it's really unpleasant. Things like rage baiting, stoking controversy, bias or selective framing of an issue, promoting an us versus them mentality. These kinds of tactics work because people respond to content that makes them emotional. We talked a lot about this in our first webinar, these sort of emotional hooks that really get people. So here's what I really want you to hold on to. Popularity online is not a reliable signal of accuracy or inaccuracy necessarily. It's a signal that the content matched a formula. Lots of followers doesn't mean lots of truth, but it also doesn't necessarily mean the content is all bad either. What I want you to really do is to learn to pause, put down our assumptions, and then think critically about why someone might choose to say something and why you are seeing it. A blue check mark doesn't mean truth. A viral video doesn't necessarily mean truth. These are signals about audiences and algorithms, not about whether an underlying claim is correct or incorrect. And once we start to illuminate these invisible structures, it might get a little bit overwhelming. Oh, there's a lot of stuff I need to think about. But I also hope that it helps you ask the right questions to bring these things into sharper focus. All right, so what motivates influencers? So the first thing to know is don't assume everything you're seeing is purely organic, spontaneous self-expression. A lot of online content is shaped by incentives that aren't always visible to us as a viewer. Financial incentives are huge. Platform ad payouts, sponsorships, affiliate links, subscriptions, merchandise. For full-time creators, these add up to real livelihoods and real pressure to keep growing. Professional incentives matter a lot too. Some people are building a career. They're growing an audience for a book, a TV show, a political campaign, or maybe a consulting business. The content and the influence is a funnel towards some other offline goal. And there's also ideological motivation. People who sincerely believe that what they're saying, they believe in what they're saying and they want to persuade others. Sincere conviction is totally real. But it is also worth remembering that sincerity does not equal accuracy. You can be deeply convinced of something and deeply wrong at the same time. Charismatic people do really well on social media, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they know anything. And there's also community building. This is a really important one for people. People will share based on building an identity, showing that identity off online, or a desire to signal that they are part of a group. Feeling like part of a community online is a really powerful thing for people, especially those who feel disconnected from their local communities in the physical world. So let's make this concrete with an example. And to be clear, before we get into it, this is just an archetype that describes many different creators across the political spectrum. I don't have any particular person in mind or person or channel in mind here. This is just for an example. So let's imagine a political podcaster. He's got somewhere around 2 million followers across his podcast platforms and social media. He's big, he's got a real platform, but he's not, a Joe Rogan household name kind of guy. This archetype fits hundreds of different content creators across the political spectrum. And for example's sake, let's say our podcaster friend has recently sat down to do his taxes. He had a good year last year. He had a couple of moments getting mentioned by more popular creators, and he was smart. He was on top of it. He was able to leverage those moments into some financial opportunities for himself. And by doing that, he has been able to hire someone full time to help out with podcast production and content creation. This costs money, but it's also speeding up his growth and bringing in some more opportunities. But at the same time, he is someone who depends on him now. Like he's paying somebody's salary. He's a fledgling small business owner. And let's say after paying all of his expenses, let's say he brought home $200,000 before taxes. That's a very nice salary for a 27-year-old or really anyone. But it's not enough money that he can stop working entirely. And it's not enough followers, influencer cash after just 1 year that he can just go and do whatever he wants for the rest of his life. He's had a good year and he could probably leverage this into, maybe a few more good years. But he's young. He's got to think about his future and where this is all headed and how he can sort of keep this whole machine running. So let's map out some things that our podcaster friend is thinking about: the revenue model, the emotional hooks, and the algorithmic reward loop. So the revenue model, this is a big one. So how much any given podcaster or influencer makes in a given month or year can vary wildly. Platforms and agencies are typically pretty mum about what platform creators get paid out. These payments can also vary, and the ever fickle algorithm can cause big swings in engagement and thus ad dollars, content visibility, and ultimately payouts. So this is a fickle business to be in, and pretty stressful if you are a podcaster friend who's trying to maintain their own income and also support their growing small business. So also complicating matters are the varied revenue streams that they depend on. There might be payouts from platforms themselves. The platform plays ads and then pays out money based on views. There are also third-party sponsorships or advertising where a brand works with a creator directly instead of through the platform advertising intermediary. And these can be really, really lucrative for creators. There are also direct donations from viewers through platforms or services like Patreon. You can choose to support your favorite influencers by throwing them a little bit of money every month. And this really adds up for folks who have big followings. There's also merchandise, live events and shows, writing books, and just sort of generally leveraging their status for further financial gain. For the purpose of our case study, a creator with low millions of followers across platforms, let's assume they're making a pretty nice living doing this, and that this is their full-time job and they're financially dependent on their content success. Like I said, you can sort of think of these people as small business owners. They're making a living doing this. They may employ other people. It's really more than just a side gig at this point. And they aren't just spouting off opinions anymore. They need to think strategically about what they say and how it affects their ability to make money and grow their audiences. The line's got to keep going up if you want to keep bringing in more of these ad dollars, if you want to maintain your visibility. You have to stay fresh. There are a lot of other creators who are coming for your lunch who are also trying to do all of these same things and compete for people's attentions. So you have to figure out how you're going to keep people's attention, keep visibility on your content, keep it in the newsfeed, and keep people engaged week after week after week. So that leads us to these engagement hooks. What performs best on our friends kind of show, a political podcast? Well, maybe it's something like anger or moral outrage. Maybe it's a sense that they are doing something to us and I'm the only person who can tell you about it. A feeling that you, the listener, are getting the real story that the mainstream doesn't want you to know about. And anger and indignation can be kind of subtle. It's not always, an Alex Jones style guy who's yelling and screaming. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle and insidious than that. And there are also disinformation tactics that can sometimes also be subtle and sort of be inserted into these emotional hooks. Missing context or biased framing or selective quoting. And this leads us to thinking about the algorithmic reward loop. The format, long form emotional commentary with outrage hooks, is attractive to a lot of people, unfortunately, especially those who are already feeling isolated and angry. And platforms reward engaging content like this. Long watch time, high completion rate, lots of comments, shares driven by anger. The algorithm rewards that format frequently. And so the creator might make more of that kind of content, and other creators see it performing well, and then they copy the format. And then it sort of takes over your feed. And it's not necessarily that this is a grand conspiracy theory. It's just sort of how the system works and incentivizes particular kinds of content. So remember that none of this tells us whether any specific claim from this archetype is true or false. What it does tell us is that the incentive structure is anything but neutral. So when you're evaluating what a creator says, it is useful to know what kind of business they're in. So let's zoom out from any single creator and look at how the content they make actually spreads through the system. So two terms that get used a lot, sometimes interchangeably, that I want to talk about today: network effects and virality. So network effects describe a very simple dynamic. Every person who shares a piece of content makes the next share more likely. Growth compounds is basically what we're saying here. It's kind of how a phone network gets more valuable the more people who join it. Except here, it's when a piece of content gains momentum with every new share. Virality is a specific pattern on top of that. And it's what happens when a piece of content sort of escapes its original network and spreads broadly very quickly. Regular popular content usually stays sort of inside the audiences that it is mostly meant for. Viral content sort of jumps across into unrelated networks, from a niche community to a national conversation, sometimes crossing into mainstream news coverage even. And the speed is what makes virality distinct. A viral claim can reach tens of millions of people in a day. A correction, if it ever comes, arrives later and reaches fewer people. And we know from research on this that false claims tend to spread significantly faster and further than true ones, partly because false claims are often more novel and more emotionally provocative, which is exactly what the system rewards. So here's how influencers and platforms sort of interact in practice. It's sort of this feedback loop. Influencers observe what the algorithm and the platform rewards. They adjust their content to match. The algorithm, seeing how this content performs well, surfaces more of it. Other influencers notice it and they copy it because they want to take advantage of the algorithm and the platform in the same way. And so pretty soon you've got a whole category of content of vocal style or tone, or a type of claim. It could take over an entire platform, not because anyone centrally decided it, because it's just sort of what was selected for. And the influencer and the platform aren't two separate forces living in vacuums apart from each other. They're co evolving. The influencer shapes the platform because their content is what the platform shows. And the platform shapes the influencer because their popularity and their livelihood depends on platform visibility. And understanding that relationship is, I think, one of the most important things that you can take away from today. And here's a cue for you as a reader and citizen. If something is going viral, that is a very good moment to slow down, not speed up. Virality is a signal to pause, not to share, and always consider why you are seeing something and why a piece of content might be going viral and why it's showing up in your feed right now. So let's pull all of these threads together before we get into our practical SIFT toolkit. So, influencers do three really powerful things, often without really announcing any of them. They set agendas, they decide what stories get attention on a given day. They normalize framings, repeating a particular way of describing an event until it becomes sort of the sort of default way of describing it, is an example of this. And they introduce and they amplify claims, sometimes claims of their own, sometimes claims that they get from other places. And at the same time, any given influencer is being acted on by a whole set of forces: audience expectations, because they know what their audience likes, platform incentives, because visibility equals livelihood, and sponsors with their own kinds of preferences. There are, of course, also personal views, which are real and which many people share sincerely online. And sometimes coordinated bad actors can deliberately feed material into an ecosystem, knowing that influencers will pick it up. And that last point, I think, is worth pausing on and sort of thinking about a little bit. Bad actors themselves do not need to be influencers. They can manufacture content and then share it, and then let well meaning influencers do the work of spreading it. And this can happen sometimes. So it's easy to hear all of this and feel a little bit like, okay, Caitlin, it sounds like what you're saying is everything I see online is fake. It's manufactured for clicks, for money, for clout, and it's just a bunch of people leveraging systems to try and make money off of my attention. And there is some truth to that. But the takeaway isn't cynicism, and it isn't extreme skepticism, and it's not throwing up your hands. Not every person who creates content online, who has influence online, is a terrible person who is just trying to get money out of your eyeballs and attention. But I do think that it is important that whenever we're online, we're using and exercising this systems thinking and understanding that when we see content, it is the output of multiple different overlapping incentives: the platforms, the creators, the sponsors, sometimes even the bad actors. And it's not just the message and it's not just the messenger, it's the whole environment and the system that we use to communicate. All of this is in play, and once you see it, you can evaluate it. All right, so what do we actually all do with this on a Tuesday when something shows up in our feed? And we're trying to understand how we should, if we should trust it or not. What is this claim saying? I really like the SIFT method. So the SIFT method was developed by Mike Caulfield, Dr. Mike Caulfield, an information literacy researcher at the University of Washington, and it's designed specifically for the pace of online information. It's 4 moves, each meant to be done quickly, often in under a minute. So before you share, believe, or act on something, think about these 4 steps. The first one is stop. Pause before you engage. Notice your emotional reaction. If a post is making you furious, if you feel like you must share it immediately, it's precisely the moment to take a breath. Strong emotion is a signal that the system has worked on you. So let's just pause and see if we need to investigate this further. So number 2 is investigate the source. Not necessarily a deep dive, but enough to know who's actually speaking. Is this person a journalist, a commentator, an anonymous account, a parody account making a joke? Just spending 30 seconds sort of trying to understand who is actually saying this. Open a new tab, do a little Google search, look at their account profile. That can go a long way. And sometimes that's kind of all you need. You realize, oh, I'm looking at a parody account. Of course, this doesn't make any sense. F, for find better coverage. So don't just rely on the original post. Look for reporting on the same claim from sources with different incentives. If a claim is real, there's a good chance that multiple independent sources are going to have covered it. If it's only showing up in one corner of the internet, or if there's only one person who's really talking about it, that itself is a piece of information. Either this is a very niche story, or maybe we just don't have quite enough information yet for more mainstream coverage. So that's a signal that we might want to pause. So then there's T, finally, trace claims, quotes, and media to its original context. And this is a really powerful one, especially for images, if you can do like a reverse Google image search. Sometimes, a video can get cut short, a quote can be stripped of its original context. And so if you can find the original, the full clip, the full statement, Oftentimes, that is sort of the easiest way to tell whether something is being honestly represented or if some context has been stripped away from it. So, 4 moves: stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace the claims. These are really good steps to memorize, but we'll also put together a one-pager for you, which we'll send out after the webinar. So now let's apply the SIFT method specifically to this influencer context we've been discussing. So when you're thinking about an influencer, investigate the source becomes, what kind of an actor is this? A journalist, a commentator, an advocate, an entertainer. And we're thinking about, what are their incentive structures? Who's paying them? Do they have sponsors? What's their business model? Do they have a business model? And you don't just need to know what kind of voice you're listening to. Find better coverage becomes, don't just read the original influencers' take on the event, look for what other reporters or domain experts have been saying about the same claim. If the only people saying a thing are other creators in the same political lane, that's worth noting. And then trace becomes especially important, especially with the kinds of media that many influencers use, like short clips or screenshots. Which brings us to 2 other things worth, oh, sorry, that was, sorry, that was it. Next slide. All right, so key takeaways to bring it home. 3 things I hope you are leaving with today. So first, evaluate your sources, not personalities. The right question isn't, should I trust this person? Because that's exhausting and it doesn't scale when we're trying to understand the lots of different kinds of influencers in our feed. The right question is, how do I evaluate this claim and why am I seeing this content? Why is this person saying this? And so the things that we've talked about today paired with SIFT gives you those moves. So second, notice virality when you see it. If something's spreading fast, if it seems a little bit out of context, it's not the type of content you usually see, slow down. The claims may have outrun verification. And then curate a balanced information diet. Pay attention to where your civic information is coming from. If one voice, one platform, one political lane is really dominating your feed, that's worth noticing. Healthy civic participation depends on hearing from a good mix of sources, not just picking the one perfect guru to follow. And the big frame. A healthy democracy depends on citizens who can evaluate competing claims and understand the things that they are seeing online. And these tools are learnable, and you are doing the work by being here. And we will be doing more work on this in our next webinar on AI and synthetic media. But first, I want to hand it back over to Chelsea to talk a little bit about Unite and Rise.
Thank you, Caitlin. So all of you all are aware we are in a moment of time where democracy demands our attention and our participation. Our Unite and Rise efforts are getting towards making the change we wish to see. So we encourage you all to be part of this movement. We know that if we activate 8.5 million voters, that could be the turn that our democracy needs to be able to move forward. So, Power Playbook 5 is live on the League Management site. Please do check it out. There's some great resources there. We're building lots of different tools and activities for your leagues to take part in, particularly the election observer work and the observer core work. So we encourage you all to be part of that in making the change and being up front and center when it comes to Unite and Rise. Next slide, please. So we want you to take action. In order to meet these goals for Unite and Rise, we have to take action now and mobilize in this primary election season and well into the midterm elections. So we're asking that you participate in a state or national action alert with your state league or at LWVUS. Attend one league or other advocacy event between August and October 31st. Use Vote 411 as the trusted election resource, and what that means in terms of educating voters and sharing accurate election information with them. And as I mentioned, the observer work. We're calling on folks to mobilize as volunteers to observe Board of Election meetings, county commission meetings, school board meetings, along with state legislative assemblies, and also elections. We know that there's accountability and accuracy when observing elections firsthand and underscoring how to keep election officials accountable and our elections running smoothly. And then lastly, we want you to take the pledge to commit to Unite and Rise. There's the pledge here in the chat. We ask that you share this with your fellow league members and your family, friends, neighbors. It's going to take all of us coming together to be able to make this a reality and take action as we move towards the midterms. Next slide, please. So I will now send it back over to Caitlin. We're grateful to have you all as part of today's webinar, and we're gearing up for the next in our series.
Yes, thank you, Chelsea. We're really excited about this. So part 3 of our digital media literacy series will be on evaluating information in the age of AI. I am sure there are some of you on the call who heard about SIFT and said, Caitlin, this all sounds really nice, but what about AI? This makes everything a lot more complicated. And I would say you are right. And Dr. Caulfield has also been thinking about this and has published some sort of updated thoughts and strategies for using SIFT in the age of AI. I wanted to sort of give you the basic introduction to it today because I do think that SIFT is a really powerful, flexible, responsive tool that is very still useful today, even though Dr. Caulfield developed it many years ago. But he has also sort of published some updates and his new thinking around this. So we'll be getting more into that during our next webinar on May 7th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm really excited about this one. This is not a webinar I've done before, so it's going to be all new for me and for you guys. And then next, we also have on April 28th, we'll have our democracy integrity briefing. We'll be back. We've been on a little bit of a pause. Our last one was in early March, so we've got plenty to talk about next week. We'll be talking about national and state-based rumors, narratives, and civic education related to democracy, voting, and elections. So hope to see you there April 28th. I think exactly a week from today. So hope to see you there.
So now I want to open it up to questions. Again, thank you, Caitlin, for the very informative and engaging webinar here. Let's start off with some questions. So the first questions is a two-part question. Are there identifiable factors that determine posts that are more likely to go viral? And isn't ego another motive in that happening?
Yes, ego is definitely a motivating factor that I did not specifically note here, but certainly for a lot of people, they just want clout. They want to see those likes. They get that little dopamine rush from seeing the notifications. And so certainly for many people, whether they're typical users, influencers, celebrities, for a lot of people, ego is a driving factor there, definitely. And as far as are there things that we can sort of clues that a post is going to go viral? If we knew, I'd say that if we knew for sure the answer to this, I would be if I knew the answer to this, I would be a much richer woman. I would be working in, I would be definitely working in digital marketing and making all of my clients go viral. I wouldn't say that there's any one specific thing. Sometimes it's really surprising. If for the old heads on the call around 10 years ago, we might remember when the dress went viral, right? That weird dress, was it white and gold or blue and black? How did anyone know that on like a Tuesday afternoon that was going to be the thing that everyone on social media was talking about? That was a pretty wild thing. But I do think there are certain things that we know sort of can stoke engagement, things like those sort of emotional hooks, us versus them mentality, getting people really angry, surprising people. Those are all things that get people to share. So sometimes we see those things are present. Sometimes it's just a total innocuous, funny, weird thing that people just like to share.
Absolutely. Like we see the span of viral videos, right? There was a video that just went viral about a tiger jumping into the audience. in at a circus in Russia. And so it can go from that all the way to more pressing news breaking matters. So just being aware of that is key. This is a great question, the next one. I'm not on social media at all, but how would I find out the basics? Do you pay for listening to each person's site? Could you just give a lay of the land about the foundation of how to navigate socials?
Sure. So I'd say if you want to dip your toe in and just sort of find out what's going on, there's no harm in creating a profile, following some people, and just sort of, spending a little bit of time. Dipping your toe into social media does not mean that you have to become a professional doom scroller who's spending several hours online every single day. But I do think that there is some value in sort of understanding for yourself, from a first person perspective, just exactly what's going on social media and what kinds of content are out there. So that's one strategy. Another piece of this is join our democracy integrity briefings if you want to know specifically about the kinds of civic and social issues that are getting attention online, that our influencers are talking about, that our platform, the kind of conversations that our platforms are incentivizing. These happen every month. And so we do sort of a landscape, a sort of 10,000-foot view of what's going on nationally, what are the rumors, who's talking about it, and then also importantly, what are the actual good information and facts that we need to know so that we can be effective communicators about these issues and build resiliency in our own communities.
Absolutely. The next question here, how does one do a reverse video search?
Ooh,
Could you walk through the steps?
yeah, so this is a good one. This is a little bit of a toughie. One thing that you can do, I don't know of a good tool today off of the top of my head where you could just say, like, here's the video, find all of the other versions of it. But one thing that you can do is take a screenshot, like pause the video as you're watching it, take a screenshot of it, and then do a reverse image search on the screenshot, especially if it's the thumbnail of the video, that you see when you first open it. And then sometimes you can do the reverse image search on that screenshot and it will bring up other versions of the video that might be longer or like the original one.
Thanks. Thank you for that. The next question. I don't have a feed except what I receive unsolicited via Gmail. I forage online. What feeds would be worthy of my attention, and what am I missing by simply relying on subscriptions to news outlets and Substack subscriptions to feed me information?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to get anxious with so many different sources out there, many of which are really good. I know we've spent today talking about how many sources aren't good or you should be a little bit skeptical, but there are so many good sources of information out there online. So many smart people writing great blogs and Substacks, newsletters, who are like, keeping track of things on social media. So there definitely are good people out there to follow. Like I said, no one's perfect all the time, but you can build yourself a really nice and varied information diet over time, I think. That being said, it's easy to get overwhelmed and feel like there is an ideal feed that I can build for myself that will give me just the perfect amount of information about everything, and then I will know everything I need to know. And that just isn't possible. Like there is so much information. There's so much happening in the world. We can't be experts on everything. So I would say my personal approach, because there are certain things that I do need to be an expert on, and maybe in your work as league members, you feel like there are things that I really do need to know about. So I would focus on those niche areas. For me, it's a lot of stuff about democracy, elections, and voting. I always like to hype electionline.org is a great aggregator of different stories about elections, democracy, and voting, states and nationally. They have a bunch of awesome newsletters. So I think if you're trying to pay attention to those stories, that's a really good way to do it. They do a lot of the legwork of trying to like find the different stories in different places and bring them all to you in one newsletter. So I think that is really good. But then when it comes to other topics, I want to be a well-informed citizen, and so I read my New York Times, and I might read a couple of other sources when there are other stories sort of outside of my area of expertise that I feel like I just should be informed about. But I'm not doing crazy deep dives like I am on, the vote by mail executive order, because that's a thing that I really need to know about for my work. So I'd say forage, switch up your information diet occasionally. I think you mentioned having like lots of good newsletters and subscriptions that are coming into your inbox. And I'd say, maybe once, twice a year, just switch that up a little bit, see if there's anyone new out there you might want to follow. Um, or some things you want to switch out. But I think, just doing the best you can and sort of prioritizing information is the best way to go, because otherwise you will get totally burnt out and overwhelmed.
Absolutely. Balance is key. We know those digital wellness strategies are really great to implement when it comes to curating our news. I just want to touch upon this next question from the league perspective. It asks how local leagues can expand our online presence. That's a great question. I think it starts by sharing resources like this, getting more familiar with the information environment and how to navigate it. We know that the hallmark of the league are in-person events and being in community with one another, but I think there's also a lot of room to grow when it comes to being active on social media, putting out information on Vote 411 through, different lenses, using social media graphics to get the word out about election information, also sharing events on social media, really using the different resources, whether that be League in Action or the iOS groups on the LMS page to stay connected to other leagues in your area. But also, just spending more time sharing information online, I think will go a long way. And that also connects to a question about for those struggling with technology, how about some training on how to use hashtags and, things like that in terms of uh, when it comes to how to navigate technology. I do want to say we are working on some a media literacy toolkit that will have more in-depth information on media literacy, fact checking, critical thinking skills that can be applied online as well. Caitlin, another question for you. The marketplace of ideas now sounds quaint. When the Biden administration tried to warn platforms about disinformation, they were accused of censorship. What's to be done?
Yeah, I think quaint is a good word for it, Jackie. I like that. And so I agree. I have had some of my work, and I've worked with folks who were targeted by sort of what you're talking about there, Jackie. And it's easy to feel really discouraged by that. It's easy to feel like, even if we want things to change, there are people who have a lot of power and a lot of influence outside of the platforms, even, who just don't want things to change. And so, how can they? And it's easy to feel that way. I get it. But at the same time, I think that we should not discount the power that we hold. Especially, the league is a very trusted source. You guys are very trusted actors in the civic world. And so I don't think that you should discount your own power here and your own influence in your communities. And I think, what Chelsea was talking about with expanding your influence online and learning how to talk about these things. In our democracy integrity briefings, one thing that we do is I always provide feedback and guidance for how to talk about these really thorny issues. We talk about a lot of kind of challenging, polarizing, difficult to talk about topics. And there's almost always a way that you can find some middle ground and approach. I don't want to say we talk about finding ways to talk about these topics neutrally, but ways to find common ground with folks who might see things very differently from you. And so I think it's hard and it is not always satisfying work, but it is important, and it will never get better if we don't do it.
Absolutely. We know that it's up to us to stay informed and to stay diligent when it comes to educating and sharing these tactics and tools with others as well. To close us out, oh, it looks like you're jumping on it, Caitlin, the news aggregator. Could you share that one more time for
Yeah,
folks?
definitely. Electionline.org is the website. And this is always, pretty much always, I talk about this in our democracy integrity briefing too. So come there, you'll hear more.
Yes, please join us next week for our democracy integrity briefings. Same time, 3:30 Eastern on Tuesday the 28th. I also want to let folks know you will be receiving a recording along with the slide deck for today's webinar before the end of the month. And as always, thank you so much for being part of this work. And we'll see you next week for our democracy integrity briefing and in May for our third round of webinars. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys.